I don't remember not having comics culture in my life. Certainly I was a fan of things like the Super Friends on television and reruns of the Batman TV series from the 60s because that was in syndication when I was growing up. But I think what really gelled for me was when my parents took me to a Woolworth's department store, and there were stacks of old comics, 5 for $1, in the store, and they let me pick up 5 comic books. And I remember the first one I picked was an issue of Justice League of America, number 134, and from that moment on I was just fascinated by the fact that all these characters I'd grown to love in the popular media were in these other stories that I could access at any time. I didn't have to wait for 4 o'clock in the afternoon or 8 o'clock on Saturday morning. I could see them in person in the palm of my hand.
They're basically, yeah, they're basically like epic, legendary heroes for that a lot of people grew up with. Not just kids now, but our parents, grandparents. They've been a part of their lives too. Superman, Batman, of course, and a lot of the newer superheroes as well.
Media and sort of walk away from comics. The only difference with me is I never walked away. Comics just remained a part of my media diet as I grew older and older and older, and the characters never really seemed to grow stale or unfamiliar or less interesting to me than when I first started. Certainly 12-year-old Matt couldn't have imagined the world we were living in. It just was inconceivable that the kind of attention and indeed respect that comics and comics culture get would be present. It just defied the imagination that we could live in a world like this one, where it is so prevalent and so common and so acceptable. I think, a lot of things happened to change people's attitudes towards comics, and it really is a process of really erosion, right? In 1978, when Superman the movie came out, there's that sort of break with preconceptions about what comic storytelling could be. And people were like, well, I guess you could tell some mature stories. But it was kind of fits and starts for the next 20 years. So it's another decade before Tim Burton's Batman movie comes along, and it's a huge success. And there are some imitators, but it doesn't necessarily change the culture. And then you have the X-Men come along at the end of the century, and you're like, okay, well, maybe this is it. And then Spider-Man, that's kind of it. But I really think the pivotal change was the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Because what happened there was the way in which that translation took place was faithful to the way that comic readers had experienced the storytelling. And so they not only adapted the characters, they adopted the storytelling practices. And anyone who's read a Marvel comic knows it's one big saga. You're just picking up an issue of a story that has gone on since 1961 and continues on to this day. And the Marvel Cinematic Universe adopted that same kind of sensibility, that this is one grand narrative. And it's really captured people's imaginations in a way that nothing before it, maybe Lord of the Rings for as long as it lasted, maybe Harry Potter for as long as it lasted, but the difference with those two things is they have finite endings. The Marvel saga isn't over. Conceivably it'll never end, right?
The new wave of movies, is in particularly the Marvel stuff, has basically opened up superhero culture to lots of people who normally would not think twice about comic books and stuff. Basically making them a lot more accessible. To check them out at the movie theaters or on TV. Since I've opened this up, I've seen visitors from all walks coming to check this stuff out. People fresh from watching their favorite characters from the movies and TV shows.
People like the idea of a saga that's bigger than life. And I think with the change that's come with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, people were ready for that bigger story and that bigger storytelling that came with it. They're aspirational figures, right? They're not realistic figures, they're aspirational. You know, they are the kinds of people we want to be. And while the powers and the costumes and the drama make it all the more interesting as storytelling vehicles, at the core of all these characters is that wanting to help other people. And I like to think that people are basically generous and good, and these are very visible manifestations of being generous and good. And I think people are looking to them and saying, yeah, I want to be like that. I don't need to be in a bright red outfit to do it, but I want to be that kind of person who puts others ahead of my own interests and steps in when I'm needed to save the day.
Those characters represent basically like the best aspects, the most potential of like what people can be, and not necessarily like having like superpowers and stuff, like being able to do like the right doing the right things for as many people as you can.
Gotham needs you. A little fight in here. I like that. Then you're gonna love me.
The question is, how long can it last? And is this just a genre like disaster films were in the 1970s, and once this decade or so plays itself out, will film goers move on to other things? Will TV producers move on to other things? And will audiences just sort of look back at it? Or will it be something like the medical drama, which was an innovation in television history that's never really gone away? It's gotten more or less popular over time, but maybe superheroes are like that they'll be a constant part of the media from here on out, and 100 years from now, we'll still be seeing interpretations of Batman and Superman and the Avengers coming to screens or 3D interactive environments or whatever we're doing to entertain ourselves well into that next century.
I think it will change eventually, because like you can only do like the same characters for so long before you have to like change things up, either by doing like either doing things with like different characters that like aren't like your mainstays, like your Captain America and your Spider-Man and whatnot, or it might scale back to where it might not be like a big deal in like the movies in the near future, but you can still like enjoy them like on on a small screen or digitally.
I think that anyone who hasn't read a comic really hasn't experienced how powerful the imaginations of the creators are. And the films are fantastic. They're beautiful. I love them. I enjoy them thoroughly. But there's something more intimate, something more meaningful in many ways to reading a comic and seeing how the creator's imagination can infect your own imagination. And interacting with that page is just a magical kind of thing that I wish more people would take advantage of. I appreciate that people can consume comics culture online and other formats, but there's just something about picking up a comic book and reading it that just still is an amazing experience.
I lean towards Spider-Man myself, just because like he's like a kind of character who basically had like kind of like the whole superhero thing like thrown onto him with like basically like the getting the spider powers, the whole with that great power comes great responsibility, and basically what like working through like how to use like the powers that he's been given to do the most good basically, and sometimes it does go good with that. Sometimes it's a struggle, but he keeps going.
I often think, you ask me that question, what's my favorite superhero? It's which one am I reading at the moment? Mm-hmm. Because there's so many characters that I enjoy, but when pressed, I would have to say that, kind of old school, I still like Superman. And the reason for that is, I think Superman isn't the story about an alien with superhuman powers. I think it's a story about a person who finds himself with gifts, and he decides instead of to hide those gifts or to use them selfishly, he decides to use the gifts for the benefit of those around him. And I think if everybody were Superman-like in that sense, if they looked to see what gifts they had, how those gifts were different from other people, and they wanted to use them for the benefit of other people, the world would be such a much better place.